Welcome to FreeMind Local, the podcast where we celebrate the movers, shakers, and dreamers building something extraordinary in their industries and communities. And today we're celebrating a huge milestone together. We're over 100 episodes, and we just crossed the 1 million views across all of our platforms, and we could not done it without each of you, our incredible listeners and supporters. So a huge thank you all for being part of this journey with us. Now, also, what a better way to celebrate this milestone than with a guest who knows a thing or two about building something unique and lasting. Today, I'm joined by Sam Calagione, the founder of Dogfish Head Craft Brewery, a name synonymous with creativity, innovation, and of course, amazing craft beer. Sam's story is really one for the books. From starting a tiny brewery in Delaware with a big dream to pioneering culinary-inspired beers, collaborating with musicians and artists, and scaling Dogfish Head without losing any of its authenticity, Sam has navigated the ups and downs of entrepreneurship with grit and imagination. In this episode, we're going to talk about how he turned a white space in the beer industry into a canvas for innovation, while balancing creativity, community, and commerce is the key to success, and how Dogfish Head became an icon of authenticity in a very crowded market. We're also going to dive into some lighter topics like Sam's DIY marketing inspired by punk rock and hip hop and his favorite brewing experiments, both the hits and the flops, and even the 3 songs he'd like to play at his funeral. Trust me, you don't want to miss that. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and get ready for a conversation that's just as refreshing as that perfectly brewed IPA. This is FreeMind Local, and here's a chat with the one and only Sam Calagione. Good question. Hey, yeah, absolutely. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Sure.
But so, kind of want to start out with, and I will give everybody a little disclaimer here that I am having a bit of a, like I said, a bit of a fanboy moment here. So I will.
Glad you took the time to
I
read
will.
the book,
I will tell you.
Cool.
So it's not a plug for your book or anything like that. So I don't get any cut off any sales of your book. But I do want to let everybody know that while we are talking about a brewer here, this is also an author. So I will kind of let you know.
What year did you write the book?
I did not write the book. I was 19 years old.
When you read it?
When I read it, so that was funny, it was on the shelf at the bookstore at Drexel. Mm-hmm. So I was working at a Riglio, but then when I went to the bookstore at Drexel, I saw that and I grabbed that, passed it around. It still exists. I know my annotated version has Post-it notes and all, and it's floating around the Riglio corporate offices. Okay. Last time I saw it was in Brian Griffin's office in his HR, I think it was.
Wow, very cool.
But yeah. So I wanted to kind of bring everybody back to that, and I kind of full circle, we're 100 episodes in on the podcast and everything like that. We're very much going into a reflection point this year, just finished out 1 million views, and I always go back to this. I go back to growing up in the beer business, and literally I started when I was 19 years old, right out of high school, and it's one of those things where I look back at it, and even in this point in my life, and a lot of people I talk about my sobriety and stuff like that, we still have alcohol in our portfolio. I still spend a ton of time in breweries and bars because of the culture. So the last few weeks I was in Lancaster and central Pennsylvania interviewing all the different brewers out there, and we were talking about the collaboration and the culture that exists. So we'll just jump into some of the questions here. And again, everything's done in post-production. So I want to kind of jump off with really kind of crediting you with really the beginning of the industry. I know there's others, Ken Grossman, Kim Jordan, everybody, you guys were very much in a very good group there. But for you especially, you very much came outside of just brewing beer and just having a cool t-shirt. We used to, t-shirt and a dream kind of story there. Yeah. So you had a very much more diverse mission for it. And I learned a lot through the book in it, but also just knowing and hearing your story through Wendy and Mitchell over the years and stuff like that. Talk to me a little bit about really the grit and the grind, not of the glory of the days where everybody's welcoming and opening the doors. I want to know for other entrepreneurs, because that's a majority who follows us. It's about 57% of our followership is entrepreneurs. Yeah. So they want to know, talking about the pickup truck running down the highway, really people saying, that's crazy, hoppy beer, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so right now here we are in 2024 in the United States today, and there's about over 10,000 breweries. But when I was writing the business plan for Dogfish in the early 90s, there was about 500. And I was 23 years old when I started writing the business plan, 24 when I raised the money to open Dogfish, and 25 when we opened. So I've never really had another job besides this after college. This is all I know. And in terms of how we stood out in that industry, in that era, as you mentioned, we weren't the first craft brewery by far. There were hundreds before us. But by and large, the first generation craft breweries that I tip my hat to. You mentioned Ken Grossman from Sierra Nevada. I'd mentioned Jim Cook from Sam Adams in that crew, and a lot of those first generation craft brewers that really opened in the '80s. We're making these beautiful, fresh, local interpretations of European beer styles, much more diverse than the light lager juggernaut that kind of took all the color out of our industry, commercial industrial light lager. These guys brought the color back in, whether it was a pale ale or Marzen or something fun, but by and large they were mostly referencing modern European beer styles. And as a 24-year-old with no money, really knowing we were going to start a tiny little brewery that wanted to be national, but I couldn't afford a big enough brewery to sell our beer even outside of our building to start with, I was like, well, what can we do to really stand out and make our mark nationally on the beer industry, even though we're going to be the smallest brewery in the country when we open? And that's when I really thought about the idea of being the first commercial brewery focused on bringing unexpected culinary ingredients into the world of beer, and treating beer recipes the way a James Beard or Michelin chef would, by saying you could have the whole world as your bounty for creative ingredients to add to food or soup or whatever. Why not treat beer with that similar respect in terms of creative boundlessness with ingredients? And
that's really, I appreciate you bringing it that way, because that's kind of, from my experience in the industry, we had the rise of kind of 2010 to 2011 through to 2017 was all the beer dinners and everything like that, and that really, your beers, I mean, especially I remember the first beer dinner we had, that beer school program, was an Ancient Ales beer dinner, and that was really mind-blowing for people, and especially for when people found the ones that they liked and everything like that. It built such a loyal following, but also it was educating. You also ran against the grind with the format, and that, from a sales standpoint, from a distribution standpoint, that was really another part that really set you aside and really gave an extra story on everything. So again, it's like every time you kind of turn a corner, it was like carving your own path through in that.
And the Ancient Ales, just the timing was fortuitous. When I would go to beer festivals in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I would bring our chicory stout, maybe roasted chicory and coffee and licorice, or our raison d'etre, which is like a beer wine hybrid before there was such a term, made with raisins and beet sugars. Oftentimes those first generation beer lovers that would come to beer festivals would get mad at me or laugh at me for putting raisins or chocolate in a beer. So that's when I started researching the historic beers and ancient brewing cultures. And I'd go to a festival and I'd have my chicory stout the next time, but I might have it next to a medieval braggot, which would be a British beer mead hybrid that existed way before the Beer Purity Act in the 1500s. So I could start talking to people when they'd say, actually, we're being very traditional by adding these culinary ingredients into our beer. And then, luckily enough, we're sitting here filming at Dogfish, Milton, Delaware today, which is less than 2 hours from the University of Pennsylvania. When you went to college in PA, lots of great schools up there, but UPenn happens to be the home of the world's foremost expert on ancient beverages, this Dr. Pat McGovern, who got into all these molecular sciences to be able to extract from ancient crockery, in the clay and the different, thousands of year old tombs, exactly what people were drinking in different cultures. And then we had a real objective touchstone for our recipes to bring them back to life. And as you said, it was really captivating for beer lovers, but also captivating for the media. And it really kind of put Dogfish on a national profile, both at the moment in 1999 when we released Midas Touch, which was an ancient ale that we brought back from thousands of years ago, and then that year we also came out with 90 Minute, which is often considered the first imperial IPA in America, because I think it's the first IPA that had the word imperial in front of it. It used to be imperial stouts, and we were the first, I think, to do an imperial IPA. So 99.9, that was the year kind of our trajectory started, and our profile started going national.
Yeah, and then especially like for me, my experience being in the Philadelphia market, that's really when you guys took like a market presence by storm at that point, as far as that goes. From my experience in the downtown Philadelphia area, because of being on my routes and everything like that, it was all the higher end restaurants, and very much went towards that route. Where what was that guy's name that ran the craft division or anything like that there?
Eddie Friedland.
Eddie Friedland and Jim Mears and all those guys. Exactly. So for me, that was like the best type of. Growing up and working with those guys was awesome. So from my 20s and through that, and learned about everything like that. Talk a little bit about going even outside the ancient ales into the music realm, and then kind of broader about your what your philosophy is with your brand, and as far as how many different avenues and genres you kind of want your brand represented in.
Yeah, so I mean, whether it's a fashion company or a computer company, or anything that's a branded company, I think to sustain it for decades, it's kind of the holy trinity of what needs to be focused on. And I'd say it's commerce. You got to be profitable to stay in business. That's not the sexy part of it. It's equal parts, or it's parts commerce, part community building, like we were just talking about, and part creativity. And those three things, I think, at different moments in a brand's trajectory, one of those three is kind of on the leading edge of helping it get through that moment in its industry. Nationally right now, unfortunately, I think commerce is kind of driving the train for national brands, because craft beer is not growing anymore. So our distributors are like taking less craft beer to put on their shelf and really choosing those ones that are viable in the market. So they're thinking more commerce. But to be a great brand, the commerce is driven, like the consumer pull is driven more, I think, by the creativity and the community building. And you mentioned for us, collaborations, whether it's with musical artists, we've done stuff with clothing brands, we've done stuff with fine artists who paint, and so that's always been dear to my heart, mostly because, probably because I was as much a music fan as I was a beer fan in my teens and 20s. And in one of your questions that you sent ahead, talked about the punk rock ethos. There's just such a huge overlap. And I was such a huge student when I grew up as a teenager in the 80s out in Western Massachusetts. There weren't any really big cities near us, but there were all these great colleges, Smith and Amherst and Wesleyan, University of Massachusetts. And so at nighttime, I would get all these different local radio stations, and it was freeform radio back there, and I'd dial into a punk rock show at midnight at UMass, and then I'd find a hip hop show at Amherst, 2 a.m. And I started hearing, left of the dial, all these interesting genres that were just burgeoning and so far away from the mainstream. And then as I got into craft beer, I saw the similarities. It was a resistance movement. So, in all cases, all three are kind of American-born art forms: hip hop, punk rock, and craft brewing, and they're all basically rebelling against something that came before them, and they're all very grassroots movements. The early DJs in hip hop in New York, African Bambaataa, DJ Kool Herc, they were literally taking the chords in the basketball courts and plugging them into their turntables and having a party outside and start rapping over there. And so it couldn't start more DIY than that. And similarly, when you look at the trajectory of bands like the Ramones on a subway with their guitars and trash bags going to play at CBGB's, it was not fancy. It was down and dirty and three chords and a cloud of dust. And that was the inspiration for Dogfish, is we were going to be super hands-on, super DIY. When you mentioned the beer dinners, I would go around the country doing beer dinners. That was my version of getting a van as an indie punk rock band, and made our own tour posters. We literally in this building had our own screen printing art shop, and we would screen print and hand make our own posters, our own t-shirts. So it was a real DIY approach, and we learned a lot of that through music. So to be able to do collaborations with bands like the Flaming Lips, who we collaborated with, Deltron 3030 on the hip hop side, or Grateful Dead, Pearl Jam, has been really a big rewarding part of our journey, and it introduces our Dogfish audience to the audience of those music lovers, and hopefully vice versa. It has a lot of good karma in that trade-off.
Oh, absolutely. Hey creators, founders, and dreamers, the FreeMind Network is brought to you by Cowabunga Johnny, where nostalgia meets creativity. Cowabunga Johnny creates custom cards that are perfect for personal keepsakes, team recognition, or even promotional items. These cards pop with personality and make an unforgettable impact. But that's not all. Cowabunga Johnny also crafts larger-than-life murals and nostalgic pop culture-inspired art. It's about connecting with your audience through bold, memorable visuals. Want to learn more? Visit cowabungajohnny.com and see how he's turning memories into art that connects. Let's create something amazing together. Absolutely, and even to the point of like where you're talking about different things. Like I remember how long, I might be dating myself, how long it is now. You and your son did. I remember a trip, like you did a delivery via sailboat.
Yes, we were just texting today. The same. It was a little motorboat with just a little 115 horsepower engine out the back. But we did a series of dinners where we raised money and awareness for the Nature Conservancy, because their mission is all about protecting the open lands on which a lot of our natural, culinary ingredients grow. So we took this little boat from this harbor here in Lewis, 10 miles from here, and we went to Atlantic City, New Jersey, then Manhattan, then Block Island, Rhode Island, then Cape Cod, Boston, Portland, Maine. So we took this tiny boat, and every city or town that we'd stop in, we would do a beer dinner and bring out the head of that state's Nature Conservancy chapter and talk about our intertwined journeys. And now my son's a fishing guide and boat captain. So that trip, I think, meant a lot to both of us.
Oh, excellent. It's interesting. Like Mitchell and I were walking around doing a tour, and we talked a lot about like different companies we've worked at and different things like that. Him and I work together. But one of the things is here, it's the brand that we're talking about and the brand ecosystem. It's in all these different aspects. It's in different genres. It plays a lifestyle for people. It's part of their life in a lot of different ways. On the same way, he very much gave me very much an internal aspect that how much it reflects the internal culture here as well. So if you want to talk a little bit about really that authenticity and genuineness that you actually, starting with you, exuberates through as in the team and everything like that with the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, probably my wife Mariah and I met in high school up in Western Mass, and at first I'd try to woo her to be my girlfriend, try to make her laugh and do funny, creative things. That was probably the earliest, moments of me honing my storytelling prowess, was to make my wife laugh and get her attention. But I always was pretty, I got kicked out of high school. I was pretty much I used my creative energies for evil, not for good, in my early years. And it really wasn't until beer that I figured out I could use my creativity towards something good and towards building a community of like-minded creative people that could take these works of fiction. A recipe or a business plan is a work of fiction until a bunch of people come together and turn it into a work of nonfiction, whatever that industry is. And so I've been really lucky to galvanize a bunch of really smart, creative people, whether it's Mitchell or Wendy or our brewers or our chefs around the community of Dogfish Head, and say, this, while I get tremendous amount of cathartic joy from coming up with an idea, recipe, and seeing it from an idea in my head to fruition, something that a customer's drinking in the bar downstairs. That's still the thing I love the most about my job. But I had to realize early on that if this was going to be a sustainable thing, there had to be opportunities and avenues for other voices to be part of that creative process. So, I'm just as excited today when a brewer that comes up with a recipe, like there's a really good tea-infused IPA downstairs that I had nothing to do with. It was a different brewer's idea, and it's really rewarding when those ideas come to life just as much as ours. The same with people who come up with our events and come up with, now, I used to design all our own labels. Now we have different graphic designers on a team that take the lead on that. So it's a bunch of creative voices kind of working in harmony with each other to bring the Dogfish Head, to kind of amplify the Dogfish Head brand presence, stature, points of differentiation in what now is a really crowded and loud marketplace. So we're really proud of that part of our journey.
The other thing too, even from, and I'll joke around from an internal sense too, was back to the Adam Lambert days of the Excel file that he used to create, where we had to figure out what our expectations of the year were, but if you messed up the one cell, it threw off the 1,000 other cells. So I said that Dogfish Head does everything different, even Excel. So shout out to Adam Lambert on the organization.
Good man.
What do you think? What's one of the weirdest ingredients you think you ever put in something, and not necessarily that went to market?
Good or bad? I'll say. One that worked, not in a scalable, but it turned out really good, was we did a beer. My buddy from high school, Mariah, and I went to, for a while, was the VP of sales for Mace, the pepper spray. And it was basically weapons grade capsicum from India that they use. And I was like, why can't we make a beer with that? So we did a beer called In Your Mace, like in your face, and it was a dark beer and when our brewers had to brew it, they looked like they were working in like a nuclear facility. They had these giant gloves and shields on. It looked like the ET scene. And the beer, it blew your mind up. I forget what the Schofield units, the heat of it was. And I brought it up and did a show. We used to do a show on I think Complex called That's Odd, Let's Drink It. And we did.
I have a hat still.
And we had Sean, who's still I think the host and founder of Hot Ones, the show about people eating houses. So we kind of flipped the script on him and gave him this crazy hot beer. But the beer continued to age really well, so that one turned out really well. On the flip side, we said, we'd never brew with food coloring, artificial stuff. So we did a beer. We were asked by a big local pizza chain to do a green beer for St. Patrick's Day. And we're like, all right, well, maybe we'll do that, but we can't be with food coloring, which is how the big brewers do it. So we did a beer called Verdi Good, and it was made with spirulina, which is basically blue-green algae.
Okay.
And the beer tasted like pond scum. It was gross. It was a beautiful green color, but you'd smell it and you'd just be like, oh my God, it smelled like a swamp. So that one did not work out. But if you don't take those risks, you're not going to find out. I think one of your questions is how do you know if a beer is a genius idea or a crazy idea? The goal is to go into any if it excites you, the concept of it. And for us, if it's never been done before, we really try to find white space, which was really easy in the 90s when we were kind of the outliers brewing with exotic ingredients. But now any tap room that you go to, brewery, it's got fruited sours and pastry stouts. That was not a thing when Dogfish was coming up, so we had all this beautiful white space. So now it's harder to find the white space because there's so many people playing with coloring ingredients. But when you do find it, it's even more rewarding to still be first and do something that's pretty exotic in a space that's pretty crowded.
Talk a little bit about so for the name of the brewery, and then kind of walk me all the way to what it means to you and everything like that. And it's more than just a brand, as far as that goes.
Yeah. So and I often forget how goofy the name Dogfish Head sounds, and so most people, at least in this part of the world, have heard of Hilton Head down in the Carolinas. So Dogfish Head's a jut of land off of Boothbay Harbor, Maine, which is like mid-coast Maine, about an hour north drive of Portland. And I grew up in Western Massachusetts, but when I was about 15, my parents bought like a cabin with a wood stove on this island called Southport Island in Maine. And I graduated from Muhlenberg College in PA, and the next day I went up to New York City. I wanted to be a writer, and didn't think I'd ever get to write books, but I wanted to do creative writing, short stories, poetry and stuff. And I was taking writing classes at Columbia, but working at a first-generation beer bar to pay my bills. That's when I really fell in love with beer. Saw I had a proclivity to tell, compelling stories about beer, creative stories there. So I shifted to writing a business plan instead of writing, poems and short stories. And I went up to tell my dad up to Maine, and we went on a jog together. And he's like, "How are your classes at Columbia that I'm paying for going, Sam?" And I'm like, "I actually stopped going, Dad." And I started writing a business plan to open a brewery. And this is the first he heard of it. He didn't even, I don't think, knew I was homebrewing. He knew I was working at a beer bar. He didn't know I was homebrewing. And he didn't get mad. He just was quiet, jogging for next week.
My dad wasn't excited when I said I wanted to
go into the world of beer. You're 90.
I was supposed to be a lawyer.
But to his credit, he thought about it for a second, and the first sentence out of his mouth was, "Hey, Dogfish Head would be a good name for a brewery," because we were jogging by the sign for Dogfish Head, which was a head of land on Southport Island. So I got my dad's okay to go on that journey, and then I got the name of my company all in that moment. And for me, yes, it is a place. It's this rustic, natural place, facing the open Atlantic Ocean. But for me, it's also, I love those three kind of unexpected words fit and sound so good together, similar to what we want to do with unexpected ingredients fitting and going well together, and unexpected experiences, opening the first beer-themed hotel in the country and helping to build a network of bike trails that connect all of our locations into 3 different towns, or coming up with recipes that are unexpected, or concepts for restaurants that are unexpected, is all kind of within what the name inspires us to do for our journey.
When you talk about brewing, you talk about the art and the science of brewing. Is there ever one that you lean into more than the other, or is it very much situational to each present moment?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say it's always both are always in play, right? Art and science, and some recipes and projects are lean more on one than the other. But for example, amongst our amazing staff of brewers and distillers here at Dogfish, I'd say roughly half of them were self-taught like me and just came up as home brewers and turned it into their career. Whereas another half of them went to schools like UC Davis or Siebel Institute or whatever and got degrees or science and engineering degrees. So some of them are coming more from the sciencey practical side, and some are coming more from the creative artsy side. So it's always a balance, and I think having both of those as a balance is important. But I learned at different eras that having too much science was really a hindrance, meaning I'd say, hey, let's brew the strongest beer in the world. And back then I might have brewers that went to schools and they're like, it's impossible. You can't get anything stronger than this. That's what's been done. Here's the book, Sam. You have to read the book. I'm like, well, no, let's write our own book.
Let's write the new one.
and so finding early on that you had to have both of those balance voices and perspectives in the room was going to be critical, at least for Dogfish Head's journey.
Well, especially too, I mean, you think about even now, take it back to the actual economic impact of things. From a sales standpoint, like you said, you're walking in with a 60-minute and a 90-minute, which are approachable commercial products that can compete side by side, and then you have like a 124-pack. You know what I mean? And then everything else in between, you guys have in the different formats now.
Yeah.
So I'm talking back then, you were really coming out with each end of the spectrum as far as the balanced portfolio goes.
Yeah, I mean, I would have never guessed when Dogfish opened as the smallest brewery in downtown Rehoboth, and our best-selling beers were Chicory Stout, Raison d'Etre, Immort Ale, which had maple syrup and peat smoked barley in it, and pumpkin ale in the fall. I would have never guessed that within 10 years, our IPA would be our best-selling thing. You got to remember, in the late 90s, as ubiquitous as IPA is now, and I think of the 10,000 breweries right now, 1 in every 2 beers that they brew is some format of an IPA. It was never a style that was huge until the late 90s when breweries like Dogfish, Bell's, Stone, Victory started really leading into that style. And then when Dogfish did the 90-minute as an Imperial IPA, it even stood out more. And pretty soon, the majority of the volume of beer that we brew at Dogfish became 60 and 90. But what I'm really proud of and how I can feel that even though Dogfish has scaled, it still feels comfortable and right to me, is when you drive in here and you see those big tanks out front, it warms my heart to know that actually not all of them are just filled with 60-minute, 90-minute. I love those beers, but for example, I drink more Sequench Ale than anything we make, but those tanks are filled with beers that have hops and barley and yeast and water like you'd expect, but those big tanks are still also filled with beers that have grapefruit in them, sea salt, limes in them, maple syrup, pumpkin meat in them. So the journey feels right, even though we've grown it beyond my wildest imagination and scale, we're still getting to bring that culinary, creativity into our brewing journey every week at the production brewery and at our little R&D breweries around this neighborhood as well.
And when kind of, not even necessarily in the very beginning, but let's say about before, let's say not in the past few years, but really in that grid of time in the 2010 to 2020 range, what do you think the secret sauce that got you through that decade? And only saying this in the sense that everything was wild, everything was chaotic, volumes were going nuts. Mm-hmm. Keeping sanity while also growing the business, where some kind of burned out or whatever else, or got confused or got ahead of themselves. You always seemed like, while everything was creative and everything was very diverse in the portfolio, there was always a strategy behind it, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So talk about how you kind of kept that, and whether it was however you did that.
Well, I mean, I'd say some of it was luck, and some of it was intentional. For example, when Dogfish really started growing, like 2000, let's say, remember I said 99 was a 90-minute, Midas came out, but I think 2000 was our first year of double-digit growth. And to your point, in the heyday of growth, I think we grew double digits every year from 2000 to like 2016 or something, which is crazy when you think of what that means on top of each year to grow double digits. But what's more, what was more of a component of making us sustainable even when the industry slowed down is for most of those 15 years, Dogfish was able to grow revenue faster than unit sales, faster. So basically, that meant that we were heading more towards more profitable things, like higher end things, 750 ml bottles, 4-packs instead of 6-packs. And that really gave our little entrepreneurial company the financial strength to pay off our bank debts, to not go into debt with some giant company that had control over our brand. And it allowed us to make our own decisions without the pressure of every month having to make our bank payments, because naively we created a business model that actually was strong financially. Now that got more challenging when the supply and demand of craft beer kind of shifting, to your point, around 2017, 2018. And we kind of saw the writing on the wall, Mariah and I, and said, geez, we better find a partner that fits within the Brewers Association of a craft brewery, but has a national sales and marketing infrastructure. Because Dogfish really, we just had Adam Lambert, our sales leader, did a great job of finding a bunch of awesome pirates like Wendy and Mitch and sent them out of their pirate boats and said, go do your thing. And they would go open accounts, but we didn't really have depth and big resources, so that's kind of drove our merger with Boston Beer Sam Adams about 5 or 6 years ago, because very complementary cultures where they want to, the people want to have fun, but they also want to win and compete, but also very complementary portfolios.
Yeah.
Dogfish had strong in IPAs, sour beers, one of the first craft distilleries in the country that we've really grown with our canned cocktails, whereas pre-merger Boston Beer had best-selling craft lager with Sam Adams, best-selling cider with Angry Orchard, number 2 seltzer, number 1 tea with Twisted Tea. So it was a very complementary portfolio, but still fit within the definition of American-owned craft breweries. And it's really Yuengling, Sam Adams, and Sierra Nevada were the big 3 when we decided we wanted to merge with another company.
Yeah, so then from that point when you guys merged, then that's when you kind of look like, from a timeline from the outside, it looked like that accelerated the distillery program. Is that
it did from the outside? Yeah, we basically didn't have canning capacity for our distillery, because you need a separate canning line, because distilled spirits blow up, beer doesn't. And we didn't have slim can capacity in this building. So yeah, when Jim and I talked about the merger, we were like, hey, well, Dogfish is already doing ready to pour cocktails like Sonic Archaeology in 750 ml glass bottles that look like our whiskeys, our rums and stuff, but they're already pre-mixed cocktails. That was before this whole canned cocktail segment took off. But we saw the writing was on the wall, and that was going to be next. And we knew, hey, once we do this merger, one of the first new product lines we want to do is a Dogfish canned cocktail, not just the glass, ready to pour. And the merger allowed us to accelerate that. We're now a top 10 canned cocktail brand in the country which is nice, And with beer slowing down, that's really helped us navigate this moment, is to have different kind of arrows in our quiver. And it's interesting to see the whole industry going there. The most famous, biggest beer festival in the country is the Great American Beer Fest. You've been to that, right? Yeah. And it seems like hearsay, but this past year was the first year that on the floor of the Great American Beer Fest, you could get ciders, you could get vodka teas, canned cocktails made with gin. So they opened it up.
I haven't been there yet.
Yeah, and they opened it up because that younger legal age drinker is 21 to 31. Frankly, that's the generation that's right now not drinking much craft beer, and they're coming into their alcohol experiences through seltzers, White Claw, Truly, and through canned cocktails and through tequila and spirits, more than they're coming into their alcohol journey through craft beer, or wine. So the Brewers Association, which runs the Great American Beer Fest, had to make that choice to kind of widen the aperture to get these younger drinkers maybe to try craft beer for the first time. So thankfully, Dogfish has kind of always thought in this space of beer and beyond beer, since we opened. So it wasn't a departure for us.
I think that's one of the things about kind of going back to sustainability and things like that, is really how, it's not just marketing, your diversification and how you look at the business. I mean, the business as a whole has a multiple portfolio buckets, but that is where, in situations like you said, one piston might not be firing as well. You're not stressing as much because the other one most likely, if one's not hitting, the other one's, because either way people are consuming something. And as long as you have something in the portfolio, they're going to be supporting you in some way.
Yeah, and that's why even at Dogfish, before it was called, our original rallying cry was off-centered off-centered ales for off-centered people, but very quickly I could see that we needed to shift it when we started doing like beer wine hybrids like Raison d'Etre, beer mead hybrids like Midas Touch, and then 22 years ago when we self-fabricated our own distillery, I was like, we need to change our rally cry to off-centered goodness for off-centered people, because we're not just going to make beers, but we're going to make them out of all these really good culinary ingredients, whatever it is we make, including our experiences. The goodness ring true, not just beer. So we're glad we made that shift, and as you said, now within this building here we can make malt-based seltzers, spirits-based cocktails, cider, beer, wine, whiskey. We have every tool under this roof to do whatever we want with alcoholic beverages, which is really liberating and gives us a real sense of excitement, even in this moment where A, people are drinking less alcohol, but B, they're not as loyal to categories or brands as they were 20 years ago when Dogfish was kind of starting to grow.
Yeah, the world's changed. Everybody keeps changing, and that's the great thing about having that diversity. You can kind of go through it. When you talk a little bit about the kind of when you scale up, so you did the Boston Beer when you guys merged with Boston Beer. How did you guys really stay to your roots while also scaling? Because a lot of times as people look at from different places, we're like, oh, they're getting big or whatever else. This feels the same as every other time I've been here.
Yeah.
But I've also been to other places after they've done acquisitions or scales, and it doesn't feel the same.
Yeah.
So I want to compliment you, but also
Good.
say like how you guys are staying so rooted into that presence.
Well, I would say, there's like when we did the merger, we were obviously very careful with who we were going to do it with. And like I said, it was about the complementary portfolios, but just as much it was about the complementary cultures. Mm-hmm. And for example, pre-merger, Dogfish had our rules of thumbs, which was like our value statement. And our number one rule of thumb was we are, off-centered goodness for off-centered people. And then Jim Cook, before we merged with Boston Beer, he showed me their value statements, and their first one was, we are the Boston Beer Company. So in both cases, it was clear that it started with we are, meaning the people come before the products, and product changes, trends and fads change. But if you can galvanize a bunch of talented people to be the basis of the community, not the products themselves, the people, then they're going to be ready to come together and take on whatever the next trend moment is, and be there when that happens. Another value that's dear to my heart is that the status quo sucks, and it's only there until we're ready to change it. And that was a value that got me into this business. We talked about that punk rock ethos, or the start of hip hop and these different American art forms, that going up against the status quo is really meaningful to me. And so even today, I'm even trying to subvert our best selling products, 60 minute, 90 minute, by coming out with other interesting hop-forward beers that aren't just relying on the traditional IPA ingredients. I know there's going to be an audience for 60 and 90. I drink the hell out of 60, but I also want to have people not just have one beer from Dogfish Head. So having the opportunity with a bunch of really talented coworkers to come together and not just challenge the status quo, but even the status quo of our own portfolio is really energizing every day.
Real quick, as we were talking about 60 and 90 and everything like that, I realized I took a video and a photo of the foosball table. So give context. Give some context there. So
if you come tour the Milton Brewery, as Nate did here, you're going to see an homage, basically reproduction of our original continual hopping device. So for 60 minute, 90 minute, they get their name because they're continually hot the entire time the beers boil. Stronger beer condenses more to make more sugars. So that's 90 minute boil, 90 minute IPAs, 9% alcohol, 90 IBUs, which is bitterness units. But basically, I found a vibrating football game from the 60s or 70s in an old Salvation Army store. And I just MacGyvered it together with some duct tapes and planks and a ladder and put it over my boil kettle. And the vibrating football game would vibrate the pelletized hops down the game into the boiling beer. Very rudimentary system, but that system is now in the Smithsonian and recognized as an American invention alongside the Wright brothers planes and the Apollo rocket. So we're obviously, no other brewery can say that. So we're very, very proud of that point of distinction for our IPAs.
That's awesome. Yeah, we talk about beer, we talk about spirits. You guys have your toes dipped in the peripheral of the cannabis in Canada. Mm-hmm. Where's the limit? And it's okay if there is a limit.
Yeah, I don't know where the limit is. Like, one of the projects I'm most excited about is our smallest business unit, which is our hotel, our beer-themed Dogfish Hotel, which is right on the harbor in Lewis. It only has 17 rooms. We're probably never going to add more to it. But looking at it as this base camp for learning more, going deeper with our brand, right? Because if you come here for a tour, you're hanging out with our brand for an hour, and our coworkers are doing an awesome job teaching about our brand and what we make. For an hour, if you go to our restaurants in Rehoboth or here, you're hanging out with brand probably for 2 hours at that dinner. But the hotel's a place where you can hang out with the Dogfish brand and the people that bring it to life every day, co-workers, for at least 24 hours. And we've collaborated with an e-bike company called Priority Bikes for both regular and e-bikes. And we've helped to underwrite with a bunch of public and private entities a whole network of bike trails. And here we are in Coastal Lower, for better or worse, it doesn't really freeze down here anymore, even in the winter, and it's totally flat down here. We have no mountains in our state, no hills even. So you can do these beautiful coastal bike rides year round and use our hotel as a base camp to get out to here to Milton one day, down to Rehoboth the next, and you could see 100 different really cool restaurants, 15 now or so different great craft breweries, not just Dogfish. So I love our hotel project as a way to get people out into the bounty of Mother Nature, but as a way to explore coastal Delaware without gridlock or contributing to pollution and driving in cars. So that's one of my favorite projects right now.
Do you think? Do you have a beer that it was like sentimental to you, and it, for business decisions had to go away, but you kind of look back and you're like, you fondly wish it made a cameo every once in a while?
Yeah, I'd say one would be Bitches Brew, which is a good one that we did with Miles Davis's family. I bet if we reached back to them, we could do it again. But whenever you bring in a branded entity, if it's not someone that's living and is the steward of their own brand, and it's more of a foundation or a family group, then there's a lot of voices in the project. But they were as proud as we were to do the Bitches Brew beer, and it's one that just goes beautifully with food.
That label was fantastic.
It's a big replica of the iconic album cover of the Bitches Brew album, and I'm thinking about it now today because they just brought a 750ml bottle of it out of my cellar to chill for Thanksgiving this year.
Very cool.
10 or 12-year-old bottle. So that's one that's dear to my heart. Also, bringing back something with the Grateful Dead. We get that asked a lot. We did that beer, American Beauty. Granola beer that we did with them. And so that's probably our most requested collaboration to bring back. So never say never.
My mother, she's not a beer drinker at all, but Pangea. It was like probably all of Ace's sales was employee purchases of my mom buying them. Yeah.
So that was one where we brewed a beer with one ingredient for every cup.
She loved it. Yeah. She's a wine drinker, and for some reason that connected with her.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So there's a bunch of those from our past, and so next year, 2025 is our 30th anniversary. And so we're going to be bringing back a lot of those favorites blast from the past beers. So folks should tune into dogfish.com to see what's coming back from the past from us for our big anniversary.
I'm closing out with two more for you. How about in history, can be dead or alive, anybody you'd like to share a beer with? Anybody from your history, not your history or history or whatever, yeah.
I was going to say Hemingway, but was a gin drinker. But if it's a beer,
or anything, yeah.
There's a photo I love of Andy Warhol drinking a beer in New York, I think at his place, The Factory. And he's an artist who I have tremendous respect for. He literally built an art studio called The Factory, and we treat our bottling line, it looks like more of a factory, but we treat it as an art studio. And I feel like I'd have a lot to learn from him. And he's another person who galvanized a community of filmmakers, musicians. He produced the first, Velvet Underground album and started the careers of all these famous, photographers and filmmakers. And So he'd be someone that I feel like I could really learn a lot from and enjoy the company of for an evening. So that's who
I appreciate the Hemingway as
get
well.
my drink on. Both of those would be pretty cool.
I would add Hunter S. Thompson in the mix, and it'd be
Oh yeah,
it'd be a hell of a night on
then
that.
there'd be guns. Then there'd be guns. Dangerous.
I just finished Fear and Loathing on the campaign trail a couple weeks ago.
So that's different than Las Vegas.
Yeah.
It's a
So
different
it's actually where he kind of just goes through, and it's
Is that McGovern or
yeah,
what?
yeah, he
was
goes
that?
down next to the river.
Yeah, that's right.
And you, it's very it's similar activities, but just a whole different mindset, a whole different place. But yeah,
I gotta give that one another.
It was good.
Shot.
It was very good.
Yeah, good.
So the last one for you is this one was not on the list, but it's no drama or anything like that. It's a new thing I'm doing now, where 3 songs you would want played at your funeral.
Oh wow, that's a good one. From 3 different artists. I'll try to go 3 different genres. I'm gonna go from an old one. I'll do the the Beach Boys songs. God Only Knows.
Nice.
God Only Knows What I Am Without You. For the people in that room, that were my friends and loved ones. I'm gonna do my middle song. I think would be a song called "The Bowery" by a guy named. So he plays as Smog. So it's a Chicago band, Smog. Bill Callahan. A song called "The Bowery." It's just it makes me tingle. And then for levity, I would end with a punk song by a band called Diarrhea Planet, called "Ghost with a Boner."
Yes.
As I go into the afterlife.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you for your
This is
time.
a lot of fun. They're great questions, and it's super cool you're doing this to help entrepreneurs find each other and help each other on their creative journeys.
Absolutely, man. It's a lot of people. People go into retail and everything like that, and you don't think about who's behind the scenes or anything like that. So it's really an opportunity to bring those stories, the human aspect first. So I appreciate it, man. It's been a long 6 months on the road, and it's been good.
Well, congratulations on the 100th episode.
Yep, exactly. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it again. Thank you.
Sure.